Welcome to another edition of the ISUC Public Lecture Series, this time with the Montfort University. These lectures are a special collaboration between the Integrated Sustainability Center at APU and the Montfort University. My name is Daniel Ruiz de Garibay, and I am your host and moderator for today's lecture. Today's topic is climate change. Specifically, we will be looking at the hidden voices of climate change. We will be exploring how the debate about climate change and the proposed solutions potentially exclude certain groups and communities, and what can we do about it. For that, we have a very special speaker with us tonight, Mark Charlton. Mark is Associate Director of Development Goal Impact and Director of Net Zero Research at the Montfort University. He is also the leader of the UN Academic Impact Global Hub for SDG number 16 at the Montfort University. And in his research, Mark looks at the relationship between political participation and the improvement for climate change strategies. Please join me in welcoming Mark Charlton. Mark, hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this.
It is the morning for you, the evening here in Kuala Lumpur. So good morning. I know that DMU has been shortlisted for this year International Green Gowns Award, which is a testimony of the great work that you do at DMU to tackle climate change and promote sustainability and sustainable development. The winners will be announced soon in July. So all the best, Mark. And I just wanted to congratulate you for this amazing achievement.
Thank you. It's not my work, I'm afraid, but we have a brilliant campus team who are really committed to reducing our emissions on campus, and they're doing an incredible job. And hopefully by 2034, 97% of the campus will be fueled by renewable energy. So this is really exciting. And
That is amazing.
yeah,
Yes.
for me as an educator here, it's really great because I can talk to people about climate change and then demonstrate what my university is doing. So I'm very pleased about that.
Exactly. You can bring a real example of how we talk about it, but we also action on it. Very good. So, Mark, without further ado, the floor is all yours. We are
Thank
really excited to have you and looking forward to hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I love speaking to APU actually because such a fantastic academic community are really committed to sustainability. So I'm going to talk for perhaps 45 minutes to an hour, and I'm going to use some slides, and then feel free to ask me any questions in the chat, or we can talk verbally at the end. But Daniel, who's a brilliant host, will, I'm sure, manage all that. So I'm just doing my slides. Can people see my slides? I guess. There we go. It took a little while. So yes, as Daniel gave me that wonderful introduction, I'm Associate Director of SDG Impacts at the university. I'm also Net Zero and Climate Research Theme Director, and I also teach politics at De Montfort University. And this is a project that I'm working on, which I think you'll find really interesting, particularly if you like football. But if you don't like football, I think you'll like it too, because it's not really about football. It's about how we bring different people from different backgrounds into talking about climate change. So don't be too put off about the idea that this is all going to be about football, because it's not. In fact, I've been working on the project for well over a year now, and I haven't seen anyone play football once, but I've seen lots of people talking about climate change, and that's really important. And climate is going to really affect our social activities over the next 30 years and beyond. In fact, it's already begun. So this is a lower league football team in the United Kingdom called Carlisle United, and the photograph shows how extreme rainfall affected their season 2 seasons ago, when we had a real bad downpour in the United Kingdom. And one of the things, we have different ecosystem to Malaysia, for example, in that our weather gets warm in the summer, cold in the winter. And one of the evidences of climate change in the United Kingdom is this heavy rainfall that we're starting to see now in the United Kingdom. But as I have alluded to, I'm not a scientist. I'm a political scientist, and they're very distinct. So I can't talk too much about climate science, and I rely on people to accept that these things are happening. So I won't go into too much detail about the science, but I will talk about climate and its impacts on the basic scientific consensus that is broadly agreed worldwide. So that's me, and this is what the talk is about today. So I'm going to talk about climate change. It was a big challenge for all the scientists globally, but also in a political context. If you think about how we tackle climate change year after year, we're having COP events worldwide, where global conferences between major countries about how we introduce policy to tackle climate change. And then if you think about that on a day-to-day sense, well, how do those policies affect you, and what changes are you going to need to make in your life to live with this changing environment? So I'm going to talk about climate change. I'm going to talk about effects on the vulnerable specifically, because these are communities that often are excluded from the debates around climate change. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to talk about why we need to bring those communities into the conversation and why that's important. And then I'm going to talk about climate impacts and my new project. So what is bringing all of these issues that are on my mind, and hopefully in the next hour be coming to your mind about what all of this means, and then how I've been able to put it together into one project and take it forward. And there's even going to be an opportunity for you to engage in this project if you wanted to. And I'll talk about what I've learned so far doing this project, and specifically how you can get involved. So the planet's getting hotter, and this is when I talked about a scientific consensus. This is broadly the evidence that that's based on. So you can see in this graph an acceleration since the world became more industrialized. The temperatures have gone up, and the 98% of scientists believe that this is due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas to create energy for industry and other, and keeping our homes warm and all the things that we need heat and fuel for. And currently greenhouse gases are being emitted are at their highest levels in 2 million years. So from a scientific point of view, they're able to see what we're emitting and the temperatures rising. So that's where the logical connection has been made with these issues, and that's why there is a scientific consensus. There is also another consensus that we need to work together now as a global community to stop the temperatures rising by an average of 1.5 degrees over the next 30 years to prevent any major essentially to make the planet livable, and to try to reduce the problems that climate change is causing. That said, we had the hottest summer ever in the United Kingdom and globally last year. That could be over time the coolest summer that we are going to face in our lifetime. So we really do need to act on this. And I think one of the things that people are starting to consider is whether this extreme weather that we're experiencing is starting to change public opinion. Because remember, not everybody agrees that climate change is man-made, and dispute the data around climate change. While these voices might be in a minority, they are also a powerful lobby worldwide. But these hot summers and this extreme weather that we're facing could be a tipping point for a social change, or a change in attitude towards how we manage climate change. So climate change is devastating. It's in a country like the United Kingdom, we see extreme hot weathers, but actually in developing countries and countries of low resilience, these make existing problems even worse. So climate change tend to affect the vulnerable far more than those more resilient communities. One example of that we're seeing globally is the issue of forced migration due to climate change. So currently extreme weather events, rising temperatures, which cause droughts and lack of availability of resource, are causing 20 million people a year to be displaced. And that's a year. It's not over a sustained period of time. This is significant. And the UN's High Commission on Refugees states around 84% of refugees live in climate hotspots likely to be affected by climate change. So that's essentially saying people who have fled their countries are now moving in to other countries, provinces and regions that are going to suffer again. So essentially they jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, to use a British term, so that they haven't moved to somewhere of sanctuary, they've moved to somewhere that could face even more trouble. And this is a real stark example that highlighted by the UNHCR, that this is a human crisis which is driving displacement and making life harder for those already forced to flee a country for a variety of reasons. And often, in a bizarre twist of cruelty, these are the countries that don't create or emit a lot of carbon themselves. So a lot of the things that we're doing in the industrialized West, so particularly United States, Russia, China, and so on, are emitting all of these chemicals into the air, but actually the communities that are being hurt by them are the poorest and least resilient. And there's a sense of injustice about that. I'm sure you can agree. So vulnerability is really exposed by climate change. Climate change is both a racist problem and it's a sexist problem. So it's a structurally racist problem in that typically the communities it affects tend to be immigrant communities, typically of colour. In those communities, the people most affected by climate change are often women and children. So it's kind of, this is again all pointing to that vulnerability in climate change. Vulnerability is exposed as climate change deepens and becomes more problematic. And often when people have moved into areas of deprivation, which are typically high migrant populations filled with refugees, ex-refugees, asylum seekers, and established communities of ethnic minority, these areas are usually areas of high deprivation. And when natural disasters happen through extreme weather, problems are amplified in those communities. And just to go back quickly onto this slide, I just want to say this is the United States. So it's a really good example of a photograph of how extreme weather is hitting vulnerable communities the most. So this is a black community, predominantly black community from New Orleans, which was hit by a hurricane caused by extreme weather linked to climate change. The majority of people in that photograph are on low incomes. They're people of colour who are going to really struggle to get back on their feet. So sometimes when I give this talk, people think that that is in a developing country. It's not. It's in the most established country in the world, the United States. So this is this really useful picture for bringing home the idea that vulnerability is still everywhere in our society, no matter which country you're in. So then you could start to say, well, who speaks for these communities? Like fundamentally, where did they get their voice around the table? How do they campaign to be more resilient? How do they campaign for social justice in their communities? This is a really difficult challenge because these are the communities least likely to vote. And for you keen political scientists, I put in quite a few citations there around this, because this has been researched over many years, and there's no consensus views about why these communities are least likely to vote, but often they're made up of younger people who are least likely to vote, people of ethnic minority who are least likely to vote, perhaps because they're not registered, or perhaps because they are time poor, which is another piece of research, that if you live in a poor community, then you spend a lot of time working, trying to make ends meet. You don't register to vote, or you don't find the time to vote, or get involved in political activity. So there is a plethora of reasons why vulnerable communities often aren't represented politically. So you could think, who does have a voice within communities which face the most social challenges? And meanwhile, everybody's saying, well, we need to work together. We need a system change. We need to reduce our carbon emissions and all other environmental impacts. That's well established, but everyone needs to do it, and everyone has a role to play in this, and everyone has to pull their weight to some degree. So this is a huge challenge. And yet climate action, which is probably the thing that's going to affect the global community most, no matter what background you're from. Climate action is predominantly taken by older middle class people, and this is a really interesting piece of research by a colleague down in Brighton, and it's really worth reading this paper about who campaigns against who campaigns for climate action, and it's predominantly older middle class people, predominantly women with a little bit of money. They're typically white, and they again are taking their seat around the table of this global event and taking this debate forward. Not to say they're excluding anyone from the debate, but they are at the forefront of this mission right now. But does any of this matter, you might say? Those people have gone out, they're making their protests. Some people choose not to vote. There's a variety of reasons why they would do that. And so we're missing some voices around the table. Does this matter in any way? And I would let you think about whether this matters or not. My argument is it really does matter, and I'm going to talk about that briefly now. So just to, I look after the SDG 16 hub at De Montfort University, and one of the targets of SDG 16 is to ensure responsive, inclusive and participatory and representative decision making at all levels. So this is something acknowledged by the Sustainable Development Goals as something that we need to achieve by 2030 to make a more prosperous, just and greener planet. So if we consider that the United Nations feels that this is a really important point, there probably is something in it. So I'm going to talk briefly a little bit more about why that would be. So voice does matter. The voice of communities is crucial for these reasons. Politically, if you want to improve your community, you need to make an argument to your local authority that your community is being left behind, or it deserves more money, or it deserves investment, or it deserves greater understanding or acknowledgement. And politically, a voice in a community can make things better. Okay. This also has design implications in a community. If a community is not consulted on how things should be and how things should look, the chances are no one will use that thing, whatever it may be, whether it be a new school, a road, a bridge. If the local authority decides to build a bridge where nobody needs a bridge, then it isn't going to work very well. So having a voice in the community and having engagement with community makes things better. It makes the design of things better. It makes people understand culturally and socially why things need to be done in a certain way. And these are really important things that underpin democracy. And I think in the United States, just to give you a really fleeting example, but President Biden is having to rebuild a series of bridges that were built 50 years ago, which excluded communities of color. The bridges were actually to get school buses for to ferry children to school, and I believe that the bridges were too low and the school buses couldn't actually get over them, and this would have been something that would have been identified had they worked with the community to design the bridge appropriate for the size of the school bus. So kind of ridiculous example, but this is going to cost millions of pounds to resolve, all because somebody didn't ask the question about how would you like your bridge to look many years ago. And you can go away and Google that story. I don't know in any great detail, but it's an example of when you don't work with communities, problems happen. And sustainability starts with survival. So you need to think that in communities of least resilience, initially, climate change is not going to be at the forefront of that community's mind. It's going to be, how do I keep the roof over my family's head? How do I pay for food? How do I keep my accommodation warm and keep my family safe? So these are issues of sustainability that will come far more in the forefront of somebody's mind when they're living in a non-resilient community, before climate change is even a thing to consider or to worry about. So political voice is important, and it helps you make the changes that you want to see. And hopefully there's lots of young people watching this today, and globally young people do have a recognized issue with participation. So do think about your right to vote and your right to get involved in politics, because young people need to have a say in how the future is shaped. And we've had problems with that in the United Kingdom. Not enough people from a younger background voted in the Brexit referendum, for example. So we left the European Union. The people most affected by that are going to be young people, because the people who voted to leave are typically very old, and they're possibly going to die before anything interesting happens relating to Brexit. So the people affected most by young people chose not to vote or didn't vote for a variety of reasons, and they are going to be affected most. So my recommendation to you is to have your say and get involved in politics and get involved in voting, and at least discuss issues with your families and friends. Very important. But that's an example of why political voice is important. But as I said before, communities know solutions to their problems better. And this is an example is the Nothing About Us Without Us, which is now a term for disability, oppression, racism, sexism, and colonialism in modern parlance now. It was termed by Charlton, not related to me, unfortunately, in 2000, but has become a real sort of campaigning tool for people who feel that decisions are being made without their consultation. And I think that the things that underpin it, that actually communities, whatever those communities are, know their solutions better than decision makers more often than not. So back to climate change, I just want to talk briefly about global warming and its implications. And this is something that is a little more close to home to you, this particular example. And it's an example, again, of how the most vulnerable were impacted in Malaysia when you had extreme flooding at the start of 2022, with I think early reports said there were 50 reported dead. These 50 were in amongst the poorest communities in Bangkok, I believe, and other areas in Asia, and also Malaysia. And then the numbers kept growing, sadly. And again, this is a example of how vulnerable communities are immediately impacted by extreme flooding, and all of those people then, if they manage to survive, they've clearly got damaged homes, damaged vehicles, and so on. And as I said, that's perhaps more close to home to Malaysia. Likewise, wasn't exclusive to Malaysia. India and Pakistan had a heat wave that was testing the limits of human survivability. This was reported by CNN, the American news agency. Cyclone Zitrang, 24 dead as Bangladesh seeks to restore power to millions. Again, really vulnerable countries. And then, but again, not exclusive to these countries. Brazil, West Africa, India had significant heat waves, as did Pakistan, the Arctic, and Antarctica. There were wildfires in Chile, storms in Southeast Africa and the Philippines, a tropical cyclone again in Bangladesh. Storm Eunice hit Central Europe, so obviously the Europeans suddenly spring to their feet. What's going on? People died in Australia. South Africa, nearly 500 people died due to extreme flooding, and all of these caused huge amounts of people to be displaced and find themselves a victim of extreme weather and climate change. So in the United Kingdom, while all of this was going on, I said Europe was hit. Well, the United Kingdom had its hottest summer on record that summer. And we are, in the main, a prosperous country with quite good resilience, really, compared to other global indices. But we can't change the weather. And we had the hottest summer on weather, which was more than 40 degrees, which is incredible for the United Kingdom. And we suffered droughts, we suffered wildfires, we had weather alerts encouraging us to stay indoors and stay hydrated, and so on. And yeah, these things are challenging, but they're also less challenging if you have access to money and access to resource. So people without money, so people in lower income households, were most likely to see their homes overheat, and that was a study by the English Housing Survey. 1 in 4 of the poorest families in the UK were living in properties that regularly overheated, and compared to 1 in 20 of the richest households. Flats in built-up areas have huge issues, and this is significant. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But if you live in a flat, in a block of flats, which some of you may do, when extreme hot weather comes, it's very hard to keep your flat cool unless you've got built-in air conditioning. But people in fuel poverty very rarely have an air conditioner or can afford to put an air cooling system on. And this is, through all of this, it was recognised by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors that we need to rethink how homes are designed now, and not designed just to have mechanical solutions like air conditioners, but actually be designed in a way that can cope with extreme heat, particularly social housing where lots of people are living in a relatively small place, like blocks of flats, for example. So the summer of 22 was significant in the United Kingdom and turned lots of people's attention to the idea of tackling climate change, including a group of young people from Highfields and St Matthews, which is a really interesting place in Leicester. And the local football team wrote to me and said, we're 1,000 young people from Highfields, and we'd like you to help us take climate action and become Britain's first amateur net zero football club. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I thought I'd have a little look at Highfields and see what I could learn about it. And then if you consider all the things that I've just said, that people in the poorest communities suffer the most, and then this is a representation of that, the data of this community, I couldn't really say no. So it's in the top 10% of most deprived areas in the United Kingdom. It's got extremely high unemployment. Everything on this list puts it in the top 10 worst of everything in the United Kingdom. So worst unemployment, lowest income, worst health conditions, most poorly educated, very poor social housing, air quality poor, high road accidents, poor housing quality, and high levels of crime, all in this one area of Leicester. And these children had written to me and said, could I work with them to tackle this problem? And I thought, well, I feel like I had to. And this is what Highfields looks like from above. So it's not untypical of a built-up city centre location, and it's a landing point for lots of people from migrant communities who moved to the United Kingdom for the first time. So there's lots of people without English as a first language. There's lots of challenges getting people into work. There's lots of people on benefits and so on. So this to me seemed like a really logical place to start a project. So I started working with these young people to think, how could I help them become a net zero community? And I immediately said to a group of the children, why don't you ride a bicycle to your football matches rather than have your parents drive you in a car? And they said, well, I can't own a bicycle because I live on the 13th floor of this block of flats. So this block of flats is called Prebend Flats in Highfields. I live on floor 13 of this block of flats. The lifts are often broken, and my parents won't let me lock my bicycle outside the flat. Okay, so it's a logical answer that as a middle-class person who doesn't really understand this community, I would have thought the logical answer is buy a bicycle. In this community, it's really hard to own a bicycle. Okay, in the same week, my brother-in-law, who's an extremely wealthy man, calls me from London, and he said, Mark, you work in climate change, you must know about electric vehicles. I want to buy a Tesla. Which Tesla will give me the most miles? Because I want to do my bit for climate change and have a really flash car. And in my head, I was thinking, there are two different conversations going on here. One is the one that we see every day on the TV, that if you want to make changes towards the planet, you need to go on a vegan diet, you need to buy an expensive Tesla car or UV car, you need to make all of these, buy sustainable clothing, all of these different lifestyle changes. All of these things ultimately cost money. And as I said before, survival starts with sustainability. And owning a Tesla is in the wildest dreams of some of the young people that I'm meeting in Highfields right now. So this got me to think about, what do I need to do with this project to make the world understand that lots of people are being left out of this conversation? So I thought long and hard about, well, what's happening? And I just realized that the voices of vulnerable communities are largely the hidden voices of climate change. So I came up with a project, because they were from a football team and they wrote to me. I thought I can utilize football because people love football. Most people love football. I accept there'll be people on the call who don't love football. They'll think it's 11 idiots running around chasing a bag of air, and I accept that. It is, but it's also often, to lots of people, it's very exciting. It's a sense of identity, it's a sense of community, and a sense of belonging. So I thought, I'm going to seize this idea of a sense of belonging to a community football team, and then I'm going to start finding a way of letting them tell me what climate change means to them, and what they think the solution should be. So I came up with a project called the Hidden Voices of Climate Change. I got a little bit of research funding from UKRI, which I was excited about, and I was able to start developing an idea that I could somehow work with the young people on the estate to give them the skills to articulate the threat of climate change and the challenges that they face personally to become net zero, because I know so far in this project that these will be very different from the experiences of my brother-in-law or myself, or people who live in a less vulnerable circumstance. So what I'm working to do is to train them as citizen scientists and co-researchers to write and record and express their concerns about what they're seeing, but also how they feel they can change their community and give them with a goal of giving them a voice in their communities to make a difference. So I've developed also an online research repository, which looks beautiful, and it's about to be launched soon, which I'm very excited about. Excuse me. Which is a place where a network of football teams, football clubs around the world, who will also be training their players as citizen scientists, can leave data that they're generating, and that data can simply be voice recordings, pictures, poems, blogs, information, and photographs, and so on. And this was some of the data gathering process that we started last week at Leicester Nirvana, which is the up at Hamilton. This team from Highfields, drawing pictures about what climate change means to them. They had a family fun day, so the girl leaning over the table there, drawing with the children, she's a volunteer, De Montfort University volunteer, working with children to try and bring out these ideas of about what climate change means to them, and so on. And through this work, we'll be starting to design new ideas for social change in this community. So also on the fun day, we did a good piece of education activity with the young people. We had these survey boards where the children could stick stickers on what climate change means to them, ask them interesting questions about whether they felt their community was taking it seriously, and whether and whether they were recycling, and so on, and so on. And that's the young man pointing at the screen. That's Vicky. He's another one of my volunteers, and again, he spent time talking to the kids about what they felt was important, and so on, and starting to educate young people around what they need to do. So the research will reveal, as this project goes on, the research will reveal the challenges that these young people face, and even this research that was done on Saturday is not ethically approved research. So this is just giving me an idea of the challenges young people face, so that I can develop the research project more fully. So this was an engagement and education exercise specifically, but we're developing a large research project now with the club, and also with academics from within the university. So our engineers in our School of Environment and Sustainable Development, our teachers, our nutrition experts, our psychologists, because there's a big mental health piece in all of this work. If you need to, climate change is quite frightening. if you know about it in detail. So we need to know like what the effects are on young people who are going to face this changing future. Health conditions as well. So again, the first rule of sustainability is survival. You need good health in order to survive. So we want people who have that level of expertise, who can help young people develop the right diets and live healthily, and tackle health conditions like drinking and smoking, which are often prevalent in areas of poverty and deprivation. And also history and politics. Obviously, myself and a couple of other colleagues are really involved in the political aspect of it. But actually, what can we learn from history on this, and how do we create social change? How do people's moods change over time? So things that we accept now in our society, that smoking is bad for us, and become part of political decision making in my lifetime. In my grandfather's day, for example, and my grandmother's day, smoking was viewed to be good for you. So how do we make this social change, and what does history tell us? What are the tipping points that we can recognize and seize upon, and to achieve our climate goals? And this project is far bigger than the idea that I'm just described to you, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in my next slide. So if you are an academic or a researcher or a student listening to this, I'm going to start talking about how you can support me and how you can get involved in this, because this project is massive. It's way bigger than me, and I need all the help I can get. So these are some of the things that I'm looking at as well at the moment. So how to educate on climate change, how to redesign and rethink sports buildings, how to design a clubhouse for women's football, which is sustainable. So we have a huge growing football community of women in the United Kingdom. I believe it's the same across the world. How do we create sustainable places that women can use, that don't just, so they don't have to share facilities with men constantly, and so on. How can we reimagine empty spaces for community sports, because community sports are going to continue and will be important in bringing people together to learn about sustainability and to keep people fit and healthy. And we're developing a football exhibition and creating hackathons where we bring our best ideas together. And this football team's Vicky Park Queens, on the right hand side there, who are absolutely amazing football team, who bring women out of social isolation in Leicester and give them a sense of community. And these things are going to be really important and really a driving factor in how we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Picture in the top left is actually some DMU students and some health experts developing a app for mental health, not linked to climate change specifically, but part of the hackathon culture that we have here of solving problems. So when I said this project is getting bigger than I'd ever imagined, I initially started the project and receiving a letter from Leicester Nirvana about could I help them be a net zero football team. And soon after that, because I do lots of work in Germany as well, I was contacted by a German football team called Eintracht Peitz, who are the photograph in the top left. And the children there have already established that that's their ambition too, and they wanted to work with me to make progress. Then the United Nations announced a campaign called Football for the Goals. So we did a joint press release saying that Eintracht Peitz and Leicester Nirvana were going to collaborate together with De Montfort University to establish these countries' first amateur net zero football teams. And we were very excited about that. But immediately, I was contacted by people from around the world, including a football team from Spain, a sports academy from the Republic of Benin in Africa, a women's football academy in the Gambia, a university in Nigeria, and my 2 teams in Germany, of course. And then obviously it didn't take Malaysia, APU Malaysia, long to say, this is amazing, we'd like to get involved too. So today I've really had the chance to explain in some detail what I'm doing and how the project is moving forward. But really, I know this is my public lecture, but I'm trying to throw it open so that you can get involved in this in Malaysia and support me in tackling these issues. So I should say that what makes it interesting about these football teams is the social circumstances that each team is living in, so which make their voices hidden and make it a challenge. So if we start with the German team, Eintracht Peitz, it's in a former East German territory of Germany, and which was very famous for its coal mining and energy production. In fact, the local football team is called Energie Cottbus, and because in the days of communism, the football teams were named after the local industries. And these children have announced they want to be Germany's first net zero amateur football team, but all of their families work in a coal-mined power station. And I don't think you can see on the picture, but right by the football pitch is the power station, which is funding the entire community through work, through jobs, through local economy. And the German government has said by 2034, the coal mine must close and the power station must shut down. And the which is going to cause a lot of disruption to a lot of families. But the children in these families have said, and we want to be net zero as well. So it's a real message from the ground that they want society to change, but they are going to face challenges from their parents who have relied on the economy of fossil fuels for so long. So that's really fascinating. I've got stories about each one, but I'll just also briefly mention that the women's team with the red shirts from the Gambia. This is really interesting in that the Gambia does not create a lot of carbon emissions, but last year the economy of Sifo, where these young women are based, was deeply affected by the extreme weather, in that they make their economy from growing and harvesting avocados and selling them. The hot weather meant that the avocados grew too fast. They had to be harvested too soon. The crop essentially failed because of the extreme weather, and it has brought a significant amount of poverty to that community. So things aren't operating economically well in that community linked to climate change. And they are really at the forefront of messaging around this. This is impacting our lives. We're not even the emitters of carbon, yet we're being affected by this so much. And it's a vulnerable community that's being described there. So this is really important work, and we can bring voice to these communities and really start to understand the challenges that communities face in terms of how they tackle climate change themselves, but actually how we share that understanding so that we create a template for a global future which is accepting that not all communities are resilient and can afford Teslas and can afford to switch to vegan diets or whatever the mood is, that we need to work together and find solutions that work for everyone and not just work for people who live in wealthy and prosperous communities. So, as I said, the project's much bigger than me. The United Nations absolutely love what I'm doing. In fact, they came to Leicester about 2 weeks ago, and we were able to describe to the person in charge of the UN Football for the Goals campaign, Carlos Islam, who is the man in the grey suit in the middle of that lecture. We also had lots of people online, including one of your colleagues from APU. So I was very pleased we were able to do a hybrid event for that and talk about some of the challenges that we face. So all of the people in this room are stakeholders to the project, either specialising in sports clubs, sports management, politics, and so on. So there was a real good collective, and then there was some really good people online, including APU, the 2 German football teams, two football teams from Africa as well there. The UK government has been really supportive to me. They've heard about the project. They invited me to give evidence to their parliamentary committee, which I did, and since then they've been working closely with me. I think people are starting to realise that I'm exposing something that hasn't been thought about to any great degree. And then we have our sports authorities who are getting involved to say this is really important work, and they want to collaborate as well. So far, I've still got ethical approval pending on some deep research into this, but I can give you some early findings on the project so far. That football clubs given an incredible amount to their communities, and they're a great way of bringing people together. They often are representative of people living in vulnerable circumstances who face different challenges as climate changes, and working with football clubs has enabled me to connect with people who I wouldn't normally connect with and hear their opinions and their challenges, and they are responding differently to the climate change debate than the middle classes and more wealthy people in society. And they need a voice in the debate for all the reasons that I gave earlier in the slides. And more so, they need to have this say on how the future is going to be shaped for them. And we need, as a society, to learn how to help each other and to work together to tackle climate change, which sounds really obvious, but it's not happening. So this is something that we really need to try and establish as part of this work. So the next steps for my project is that I will learn how to do slides properly, and they won't look so wonky when they're online. But my next steps is I'm launching the website hopefully in the next 4 weeks, where we can start creating a repository of engagement with the football teams worldwide. I'm starting a pilot research project. I'm working to encourage the young players to become citizen scientists for their communities, which will lead me to another research paper around using citizen science as a methodology for bringing out voices. That's going to be something in the pipeline for me. I want to create a bank of evidence so that I'm not just relying on my own experiences with Nirvana, that I want to draw on your knowledge in Malaysia and my colleagues in Germany and Nigeria and so on, so that I can speak more truth to power about the things that I'm finding. And I want to support any club that comes to me asking for this help, because there's so much interest in this project now. I want to be there to say I'm here, and I'm going to find you someone who willing to listen to you and do that. And I want to promote the project as a worldwide opportunity. Every slide that I've given today has really shown how globally, in different contexts, we are all facing different types of challenges. So this is a great international network to work together on. And obviously I want to publish my findings as a bank of evidence for moving this forward. So I'm not sure how long I've spoken for. It feels like about 50 minutes is my guess. If you want to get involved in this, you're very welcome to contact me. This is my email, and I'm very delighted to be able to share this with you today. And I'll hand back now to Daniel, who I hope will pick up from here and lead the discussion further. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for listening to me. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much. Thank you for the enlightening lecture. Also, I'm really thrilled to hear about your project. I think it's an amazing example that you are given about how to bring voices that otherwise, as you mentioned in your title, would be hidden, to bring them into the conversation. And I think you have a special advantage there, because you are, as you mentioned, selecting these communities because their circumstances themselves make them actually hidden, make them first of all more vulnerable, but second of all less likely to be part of the conversation. So I think the project itself select them very nicely, but also probably would bring about those voices to the conversation. And also we have a lot of students listening. I'm sure a lot of them are football passionate. So please, students that you are listening to us, if you have interest in this project, if you want to learn more about it, get in touch or even make a comment right now on YouTube or on Facebook, whatever platform that you are following us, and we'll try to bring your voice in the conversation here with Mark and myself. So just some sort of ideas that I got while you were presenting. I took note about a lot of things. I took note about nothing about us without us, which is a sentence that is quite close to my heart because I used to work on education for people with disabilities, and that's a phrase that it was actually used um, mostly by that movement, but then it moved to other communities that are being marginalized. And I also took a note about survival starts with sustainability, which I think is very relevant, very interesting, because when we're talking about these communities, perhaps their main sort of immediate problem or immediate thought about how their life is going on is not really about the big words that we hear every day about sustainability. As you were mentioning, the example of the Tesla or going to change your diet and start being vegan, etc. So it's those social circumstances that actually interest me. And I saw a question from the audience that asked, what can an individual, a normal person, right? And I would even add from these communities that you are describing to us that are in Spain, they are in the Gambia, but we also see them in Malaysia. What can they do about climate change? And I would even add, how can they put their voices out there so that their concerns become part of the conversation?
It's a great question, and what I would say collectively. So in each circumstance is different. So I think it's very patronizing for me to say to somebody who lives in a poor community that they need to use less electricity, for example. So if I can't really say to the women who live in the Gambia, use less electricity, because they don't, in the main, they don't use much electricity compared to people in Central Europe. So there's no one silver bullet answer to this. There are simple things you can do, of course, like you can use less electricity, you can buy fewer clothes, you can fly less. But I think in this circumstance, what I'm really advocating for is start to think about this stuff, start to develop an opinion on it, and start to have your say on it. And I think that this is really important, and these are significant steps, particularly for young people who perhaps are engaging in politics for the first time. So read different opinions on climate change, form your opinion, read different pieces of science and different opinion, and then when you've formed your opinion, you can write to your MP, so your local politician, and then start saying, I'm really concerned about this, and list the reasons that you're concerned, and start to articulate to people, friends and family, that you are your beliefs around climate change, and perhaps either join a social movement or form a social movement or start to talk about these things. So this is not possibly the normal answer you would get from somebody who says, what can I do about climate change? I think that there are many things people can do about climate change at home. So you can use less electricity, you can install a heat pump, you can do all of these things. But I'm giving a very generic answer that think about what you can do as an individual, of course. But I think that we need a global voice on this now, and we need to move forward. So I would say, learn about climate change, form your opinion on it, and start telling people in power that you want to see change and that you want to see it fast. Because years are going by, no decisions are being made politically. So I think that's where we've got to be now. And that's my own political philosophy around democracy, but we're reaching a point where we have to move. We have to move the dial, and we can't settle for the status quo. And I think people are being tired of saying, use electricity, don't fly somewhere nice on holiday. You know, they're all very noble and important things to do, but we need a social change. So we need to start talking about it.
People are getting tired. Also, people are feeling that sometimes they are not being heard, they are not being listened to, and at the same time, we have observed study after study that young people are less involved, at least in what we used to call the formal, more traditional way of participating in politics. Right? Perhaps it's also because policy is not really reflecting their concerns. So in a way, it's a cycle. So since you've been studying some of these young people, you've been listening to them. Do you have any specific sort of advice on how could we break this cycle? How could we get young people involved, those that don't really get involved? And once they get involved, how can we see that what they are saying to us actually it becomes policy, or at least is being heard of and discussed, but not simply ignored?
Yeah. So what we need to do is create more entry points for young people into politics, particularly from areas of deprivation. I think that's really important. I think actually universities are a really important place to do this. So I did a big piece of research with around 200 students who volunteered in communities doing different projects with refugees and homeless people. And then I tested whether they felt more politically driven after volunteering than they did before volunteering. And there was a significant movement towards people wanting to have a voice and become political after they'd spent time volunteering. So I think opportunities that expose young people to social problems in different communities through volunteering or through other activities is one way. I think that we could teach at a younger age the mechanics of politics. So lots of time people don't participate in politics because they don't have political knowledge. So this is a really important thing. It's a skill. So on top of everything, on top of all the other challenges that I gave, that people might not have a lot of time, or they might not even be able to afford to vote because it's going to cost them money to take the time to vote or to travel to vote. All of these things, you know, on top of that, there's a huge layer of people who don't know where to start, like who to vote for one, like, so who represents their political values, and then how to actually become a registered voter and to get involved. So there's still lots of work to be done. And this, if you look at the global data, so it's not like an issue, just an issue for the West, but all modernized countries worldwide have a democratic deficit, specifically amongst poor people and young people, and it's often down to political knowledge. And I think a good way of doing it is getting people angry about things, and then they want to learn about it, be the change.
Political knowledge and democratic deficit. I think that could be another lecture that we could do. But focusing on solutions, what do you think would be the most common mistake that policymakers do that results in certain communities or groups being excluded? The idea that you mentioned about building bridges where buses cannot pass
Yeah.
because they didn't consult before. Could you elaborate a little bit on that from your research?
So so the most common mistake policymakers make that results in certain communities being excluded is they don't work with communities. They don't talk to people. So they don't develop policy together. So often policy is driven by central government. And you can see this now, like in the United Kingdom. I keep forgetting you're in Malaysia, like that it's like probably got a significantly different political system to the UK. But in the United Kingdom, we're heading towards general elections in the next 18 months. And you can already see that there are political policies that are being driven. And sometimes you just have to wonder, who is asking for that? But at the moment, in fact, there's a big policy around stopping small boats of migrant communities coming into of refugees, coming into the United Kingdom, and the government is driving these policies that are frankly unworkable, and there seems to be no negotiation between society, refugee communities, the people in France, and the political class. And so it's well known, for those of you who study political policy, it's well known that engagement is one of the most important things of developing political policy, because you negotiate what the best policy is. You typically learn something about what the best policy is. And not only have you done that, but when you're developing this policy and running it through to become law, people are already bought into it because they feel like they had a say in it, you know. So it's personal to them, that they felt consulted and they feel part of the policy and part of the change. So the biggest common mistake that policymakers make is just not talking to people and asking them.
Who sets the agendas? That's also another big political issue here. Who suddenly a political topic becomes at the top of the agenda, but who has put that topic on the agenda? I think democracies that have a bigger amount of spaces for deliberative politics, small groups that perhaps can bring up the issues all the way up to MPs, etc., particularly do a little bit better in setting the political agenda. But inevitably, it's true that we get suddenly big groups, big corporations, big interest groups, particularly setting setting the agenda.
Yeah.
I'm going to take some question from the audience, Mark, if you don't mind.
Of course.
We're talking here about young people and how to involve them, but our colleague Jacqueline from APU, she's quite right in pointing also at other source of knowledge and experience, which is our fathers, mothers, and I would even say grandparents. So there is a lot of focus on the young, logically, but should we also be looking at our grandfathers or mothers, fathers, mothers, and to learn how they used to do things? Perhaps a reversal of development is a good thing. This trend that we might call uh, the growth, is it something that we can learn from? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think it's a wonderful question and a wonderful point. I think my parents, who are waking up to the issue of climate change, have quite a lot to say to me about this. That when they were younger, they had no concept of plastic bottles. Nothing came in plastic. Everything came in glass. And people who bought a glass of lemonade, a bottle of lemonade, could actually get money back if they took the bottle back to the shop where they bought it. So, like, the bottles would be reused and recycled, and people would benefit from that. And that stopped. And now we have this instant gratification of a bottle of cola in a plastic bottle, and we just throw the bottle away, and that's a massive problem. But this is, for me, this is a simple example. There are probably 1,000 things that my parents did that, and my parents are in their early 70s now, in fact, late mid 70s, and some of the things, the way they lived their life, you could say actually that's far more sustainable. So they didn't have the concept of fast fashion, for example, where fashion companies was changing the look of the clothing every week, and you had to go and buy something new, and you had to try and keep up with all the trends. That was not a thing. They, like, obviously they dressed nicely and fashionably for that time, but they weren't constantly updating their clothes. And so that's one thing we can learn, that actually society works perfectly fine if we wear the same outfit more than once. There are different ways of receiving and storing food, for example. Doesn't constantly have to be in plastic. There are, I couldn't here and now list 1,000 reasons, but I think there is so much to learn. Even the design of buildings, for example, like there must be something in architecture that people can look at and say that, well, buildings designed 100 years ago that have stood the test of time, they must have been built in a certain way, and all of these things. So, yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think there is something that we can do.
A lot of the things that you mentioned have to do with the way we design things, the way we think about products. Obviously, if we think about a product as a single-use product, it's going to be used once and thrown away. Another thing is values in society, and you mentioned that in your talk before. That by working with local communities, we can also understand what are their values, what is important to them, how do they understand that things that are being told as big policies impact them, and how do they understand that those things are important in their lives. So I want to ask you, what have you been learning and understanding by working with these young people about how can we understand their values and translate them into policies? I'm sure they have perfectly understandable reasons for do what they do. And you mentioned the example of the bicycle. That was a great example. How can we understand them and transform that into policy?
Well, I think even if you use the example of the bicycle, I mentioned, it fundamentally shows that that these communities have different needs to other communities, that we can't just come up with one silver bullet solution to change everything. There are, I mean, you could argue, well, we could design bicycle storage units for the estate or something like that, and that might well be a solution. What I'm really learning is that it's not so simple as people can just change their life overnight and respond. Some people can. So my brother-in-law can, because he can afford a car. Like, I could become a vegan, and I do try to eat vegan when I can, because I can afford that, you know, and I have a choice of what I'm going to eat. You know, some people don't have that luxury, you know, and that's so. What really, if I suppose one takeaway is that people need a certain level of income to live sustainably, and this is probably for those of you who do business studies, this is probably like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs situation that we've got going on here. If you live in extreme poverty, how hot the weather is not your concern today. You know, it's kind of feeding yourself or keeping the roof over the head of your family, you know. And so we're probably looking at a model like that. And what also I'm finding from this work is that things that tend to be sustainable and benefit the community actually tend to, over time, be value for money and actually go a little bit further, make money go a little bit further. So there is a kind of interconnectedness with income and finance and how people live. But often there's a thing, like a saying in the United Kingdom, I don't know if you have it in Malaysia, it's like buy cheap, buy twice is a thing. So if you buy a pair of shoes that don't cost very much money, they're often the not very good quality and they wear out, and you have to buy another pair a month later, because which then if you add the cost of the two pairs of shoes together, you could have bought one really good pair which would have lasted for 6 months. Okay, so it's that kind of logic. Is how do we support people to make the right decisions, but actually make decisions that will benefit them over time? I probably used a really bad analogy there, but, like, you know, it's this idea of, well, I don't have much money now, so I need the cheapest pair of shoes that I can buy. You know, when if they bought more expensive shoes, they would last longer. You know, and shoes is a paltry example, but this could be used in anything from electrical equipment to vehicles or anything. You know, that's just, we need a more sustainable way of living, and often that is having a basic standard of living in the first place.
All right, absolutely. So we are getting a lot of questions from our audience, so I'm going to start going through them, even if they are not very related one to another, but I hope you don't mind. So our first question here is, what can be done to prevent actors from hiding behind sustainability for development and economic gains, despite being unsustainable in reality? I think we are talking here about greenwashing, all sort of practices that even some clubs, big clubs, might be doing, saying that they're sustainable, but we don't really know. Is there any lessons that you can tell us about from your project on this?
Yeah, I mean, from my project, I haven't seen anything of this issue, but I think it's a wonderful question, actually, because it's something that's on my mind, in that I see some big companies who are making some very bold claims at the moment that I think cannot possibly be true. What little I know of climate science, I think that they're not running a net zero operation. like no chance. I'm not going to name the companies here, but because I would just be going off the top of my head. But so I think there is too much greenwashing now, that people are hiding behind this issue. So I'm very grateful for this question, and I think that again it comes back down to this idea of voice, that we need to start standing up and exposing these and evidencing that there is greenwashing. So lots of great journalism going on at the moment that is really bringing this stuff to the fore, but also we need to have this more in our sort of public exposure. So I think if you learn about this stuff, and I encourage people on this call who use social media to use their voice when they learn about this stuff, to tweet it, to I don't know if everyone's using TikTok these days, so like all of this, I'm going to have to get on there at some point, I think, and learn how to use it. But so Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, start pointing out that these things are not what they seem. You know, you see beautiful adverts of people driving through beautiful green countryside, promoting these so-called companies of green virtue, but in reality, it's simply not happening. And some of the things will be exposed in their annual reports of company reports, because now there's legislation to promote the levels of commitment that they're making to environment, certainly in the UK.
This fits in, Mark, with the idea that you had about empowering citizens, making those kids that you were working with able to understand what's going on, to be able to report it, and to be able to pass it on to their communities, so that a conversation, in this case about greenwashing, starts. Very good. We have another question here from one of our students on sustainability, Tasni. She's asking, if nations still refuse to acknowledge their contributions towards climate change, and the narratives of these communities more affected, so if they refuse to understand and accept that, what would be the next thing that we can do to encourage change?
Okay. Well, just very quickly, most countries are acknowledging their contributions now. In fact, even the one that gets the most criticism, China, its emissions have fallen 8%. So we're moving in the right direction on some of these. Big countries are refusing it. Russia is perhaps a different conversation altogether. And also we have the war in Ukraine affecting global emissions anyway, on top of that. And this is something we need to get beyond, because obviously if I'm saying to you, well, you could turn your lights out, you could use less electricity, and then meanwhile China, Russia overnight are emitting an astronomical amount of emissions and so on. Fundamentally, it still comes down to political voice and political change, because we have to change our communities, but then we have to promote to the world that their communities must change as well. So it's all about getting people on the same page, which is going to be challenging, and perhaps history has told us that not everybody is going to get on that page, but the majority of people, we need to get on the same page about this. That you're right to point out that some nations still refuse to acknowledge their contributions, and I don't think that's going to change in the next 5 years, but I think it may well change in the next 10. But it includes our effort to bring that voice to the table and like make it a global movement, because climate is not a UK issue. It's a global issue. It's not a Malaysia issue. It's a global issue. So we need to unite everyone and fight for that change. And these big countries, when all of the countries are making the change, they're suddenly not so big, you know. So it's important that we unite as a global community around this issue.
Right. Sorry, I lost you a little bit. To bring back the conversation to the idea that our colleague here posed us, Dr. Stephen. Dr. Stephen is asking, are we on track to slow down the worst effects of climate crisis? I think you are already showing us very well with all the pictures that you show us that we are not, and indeed, not only we are not, but in some cases we are denying it, or we are denying voice to those that are suffering these consequences harder. But trying to focus here on the positive side of it, what changes need to be made? Is there any technologies that can be implemented? Is there any change in the way we do politics that can be implemented? Is there any ways in that we can change in the way we do economics? Could you mention like two or three things that you think would be very relevant to mention to answer Stephen Poon, Dr. Stephen answer?
So that's a really really great question, Stephen. In terms of I think Daniel's assessment that we're not on track to slow down the worst effects yet, and we do need to invest in new technologies, and we do need to establish ways of doing that. So in terms of what changes need to be made, what I would suggest is that we have a global tax introduced where companies who emit a lot of carbon in their products are paid. It's not my concept, but there's some great books about it. So Dieter Helm, for example, wrote a great book called Net Zero, where he advocates for a international tax imposed on every country called polluter pays, where the tax called polluter pays is essentially a carbon tax, but whoever creates the carbon in the production of a project or a product to be sold globally pays a significant tax in the first instance to offset the amount of carbon being created, but secondly to invest in new technologies to work towards climate change. And fundamentally, the tax would be a barrier for trade. So nobody wants to buy things from China cheaply anymore if there's a tax on top of it, which is going to make it unviable and can be sourced locally. So it'll have this global effect for change, but also it will be make it more challenging for companies to operate. So this is a really controversial thing, and I can understand people saying not more tax, not more expensive things happening, but it will ultimately see a radical change in how we buy things. You know, if you want to buy something from China, it shouldn't be the cheapest thing. If you live in the United Kingdom and the cheapest thing you can buy is coming from China, what is that saying about that thing or the United Kingdom's supply chain? You know, so this would rethink supply chains globally and how we do things and how we produce things. So I am a big advocate for that right now. I think it would be a radical but transformative idea. The idea that the polluter pays, and a very fair and just one, I might add. So unlikely to be passed by a politician anytime soon, but that would be a sensible solution, I think.
Well, one issue here to consider is perhaps a lot of European societies have moved partly their production overseas. So now we will have to import and import more expensively. It's not something that anyone wants to do. But I agree that fundamentally, as a concept, it's also the basis of environmental policy. The polluter pays. So we should have to start thinking about what to do to reshape our economic system, that it works in the way that you're mentioning, the polluter changes. I'm just going to take another question. Thank you very much, Mark, for your time. This is the last one.
Okay.
From our director of the Center of Sustainability in APU, Dr. Stephen Poon. Just to wrap up, perhaps, all the ideas that you've been telling us about young people, the question is, how can young people contribute to change? Right? You mentioned several things, but perhaps the question wants to put the emphasis on, given that the political climate now, it's one that is marked by this powerful interest that we mentioned, with a strong rhetoric, little action, and a system that actually is alienating them. Right? It's getting them tired and bored and not really wanting to engage with the system. So, is there anything that perhaps can be done so they can contribute to change?
Yeah, I think they could get involved in politics at a younger age. I think this is part of the problem. I think Stephen's points are absolutely right, that we have polarizing debates now. People are rude to each other. They ignore problems. They go for the most populist solutions. Like, populist solutions might be popular by their nature, but they're usually and give you maybe a short boost or sense of something being achieved, but long term they unravel very quickly. And what's happened in countries that have evidenced populist leaders, those leaders have ultimately been voted out. So if you look at Bolsonaro in Brazil, President Trump in America, and Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, to give you three examples of populist presidents, not only have they been removed from office by a variety of means, in the one that was based around an election, somebody with more liberal environmental policies was actually voted in to Brazil to stop them cutting down the rainforest, which is a massive global significance for the fight against climate change. So things can change for the better, and I think young people start thinking about this now, start talking about this now, and start seeing yourself as the person who is going to be in office making these decisions, because it's going to be a long run to get there. And do it now. Try and get there try and be president of your country before you're 30 is my advice. So go for it. But ultimately, while you're doing that, making your arguments, you're making people change the way they think, and this is important. Ultimately, everyone can do that. So we can. I think the idea of populism is unraveling, and it's here now, which is problematic. But I think it is an unsustainable part of politics. It doesn't do politics any favors, or the reputation of politics any favors, but also it cannot be sustained, because it's a short term. It's a short term hit. Really, it's not a way to run a country, and also the complexities of society cannot be achieved through, and the problems cannot be achieved through populism. And I think certainly people living in the United Kingdom now are starting to realise that, and people in America voted against that, and people in Brazil voted against that, and I'm seeing globally seeing other countries now start to move towards this idea that populism is a short-term fix. So yeah, in conclusion, get your voice, make it heard, and you can't do any more than that.
So to borrow your words, I would say perhaps we could conclude by saying that populism is just a fixed term that, a fixed solution that it will only run short term, but it's not really long term, And it's certainly not part of this idea of nothing for us without us. It looks like it is, but it is not. So, if you allow me, I think I'll conclude our conversation. It's very interesting, but our time is running out. I'll conclude our conversation by saying that perhaps the idea it's for young people to act by the maximum of nothing for us without us, and I'll ask them to try and become president before you're 30, as you mentioned.
That would be
Thank
great.
you very much, Mark. That was a very interesting lecture. However, our time is up. I think you really make a very insightful ideas for our students, for our young people. You presented a very interesting project that I'm sure a lot of people that are watching us are going to be emailing you and asking you for taking part. Certainly here in Malaysia is something that is very interesting for us, for our university. Is something that we would like to be involved absolutely with you. So yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing your research, your ideas. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So, on behalf of ISUC, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure to learn from Mark Charlton. Thanks to all the team behind the scenes for making this lecture possible. See you in the next upcoming lecture. And until then, take care and have a wonderful evening if you are in this part of the world, a wonderful morning if you are in Europe and other parts of the world. Have a great day, everybody. See you. Bye bye.